Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you are having a fabulous day already. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend. I am studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, but not a counselor yet. That's important to remember because everything I talk about in Wellness Wednesday is either things that I've learned or things that I have personally experienced. So just keep that in mind. I am a runner, a jazzerciser, a line dancer, and a wellness advocate. And I started Wellness Wednesday because I have been in a lifelong journey with anxiety and depression and have found that when we share our tips and tricks and things that work for us with others, that we can all learn from each other, kind of lift each other up, build each other up. It's the same concept that's behind peer support, which really, really works. And there's a lot of evidence behind it. So if you have, wow, okay, let's try that again. If you are here, let me know you're here. And if I don't acknowledge you, it's because sometimes Facebook doesn't show me all the things. So it's not because I'm ignoring you if I don't say hi. But please say hi to me and I will definitely answer afterwards if I don't see it during. So if you've been following me for a while, you already know that Wellness Wednesday often ends up talking about mindset because mindset, it turns out, at least for me, has largely been, good morning, Miss Beverly, largely been behind my recovery, my wellness recovery, if you will. And when you battle with anxiety and depression, especially as long as I have, oftentimes there is no such thing as recovered. It's a constant state of recovery and a constant reminder that it's daily practice. I was speaking with a friend the other day who just has improved in so many ways from a situation they were in. And when I complimented them on that, they said sometimes they still have really rough days, and that's a thing. Sometimes we slide backwards. Sometimes we do what I call revert to training, which isn't my own phrase. It's a phrase a friend used a long time ago. But what I said to them was that those days where we slide backwards get fewer and farther between when we continuously work to change our thinking and to change the way we look at other things and ourselves. So again, if you've been following me for a while, you know that this often ends up being about mindset. And we do talk about physical things. Sometimes we talk a little bit about diet. We talk a little bit about exercise because it's very related to wellness, but not as much as I thought it would be when I started this. We definitely end up talking about mindset more. So if you've been following me, you know that last week I talked about how trust influences everything, gave a little nod to Billy Joel with the song A Matter of Trust. And not only does trust influence everything, but it often influences how we think of ourselves. And it was maybe kind of weird to hear me talk about us having difficulty trusting ourselves. And last week's challenge was to identify maybe where you've lost trust in others or yourself or your higher power even. And what are you trying to control because of it? And then to try to choose one small promise to yourself that you could keep to yourself in the next week. And I hope that you'll let me know if you did that, if it helps. If you don't feel like sharing publicly in the comments, then feel free to message me. But that's kind of what we talked about last week. Now, with that said, for this week's topic, the title may or may not have kind of alluded to what I'm going to talk about. A friend of mine recently injured themselves, and I've been through how that changes things, at least temporarily before. And I have another friend who has a significant other who was injured some time ago, and it's beginning to affect everything because it's been a gradual downward decline. And that person simply cannot do the things they were once physically able to do. And unlike the friend who is temporarily injured, this person may not ever be able to do those physical things again. So it's made me think about how much can't, or I can't, steps into our lives in many different ways and not just physically. So my simple question for you today is, what if you can't? And then hold on to that thought for a minute before you answer. So when I posted my teaser yesterday, the image in the graphic was a tree that had fallen over a path. We don't usually get a warning. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't get a warning when the proverbial tree falls across our path. We mosey along with a plan. We may even have some momentum, and we're just cruising along, right? And then all of a sudden, plot twist. And that plot twist doesn't always give us a what if we don't want to choice. It's sometimes, and sometimes it's not a motivation or an effort issue, but a genuine I can't for whatever reason. Sometimes we get sick. Sometimes we injure ourselves. Sometimes fear overrides and keeps us from moving forward. There's a lot of different ways. So now, with that said, I want you to fill in the blank. If you're willing, drop it in the comments. What if you can't run? What if you can't walk or work or drive or care for someone else, or volunteer or remember or travel or keep up physically, finish your schoolwork on time? Everybody's blank is different. So if you have a what if I can't blank, drop whatever you're filling that blank in the comments if you're willing. Otherwise, send me a message. And just think about that, and I'll move forward here. So my first running injury was a stress fracture, and I had started running, and this was, for those of you that have followed me for a while, you probably remember me talking about how running kind of started my journey forward instead of being stuck in anxiety. Now, does that mean everybody should run to conquer their anxiety? Absolutely not. It doesn't work for everyone. But I began running, and as a result of my running, I began cleaning up my diet to fuel my running. And as I went along, I realized what a profound effect both of them were having on my anxiety levels. That was just the beginning, because once that process started, it became a whole delving into my diet and my exercise routines and my mental routines and all of that. And it's been an ongoing journey ever since. But my stress fracture was much more emotionally painful than physical, because I didn't just lose the ability to run for 6 to 8 weeks. I lost my routine. I lost my stress relief, my outlet, my confidence, some of my independence, because I couldn't drive for a bit, and I had to ride on those automatic carts when I went to the grocery store. And there was just, I couldn't mow the yard. There were a lot of things that I couldn't do that were part of my independence. And that really struck kind of hard in the beginning. And it truthfully just felt like I had lost part of my identity. If you've ever been injured or sick, so much that it kept you from doing those things for a while, then you understand what I'm talking about. But we're also not just talking about athletics here. I've watched someone my age recover from major heart surgery, which is not normal for my age. Normal being relative, of course. And they've always been active and constantly doing and constantly caring for others. And suddenly they had to be cared for instead. And even a year and a half later, they struggle to do all of the things that they used to be able to do. And they often sometimes feel broken. And that was a genuine I can't for a while. I had a feeling you might relate to this, Miss Beverly. That was a genuine I can't for a while. Now, are there still some things that they cannot do that they used to be able to do? Yes. But not in the sense of can't do as much as the can't do it as much or as often or as well. Or maybe needs to take different steps beforehand. So it wasn't the end of the world. It changed things for a little while, and sometimes it changes depending on the situation and the person. Sometimes it changes the way things look going forward permanently, but not always. For example, have you ever had a friend just to get off the physical stuff for a minute. Have you ever had a friend that lost an important job that they held for years? I had a friend a few years ago who did lose an important job through a series of unfortunate events that were not all under their control. When that happened to a friend of yours or someone you know, or maybe even you, what was that like for you? Or what was that like for them? Because the friend that I had that this happened to seemed really lost afterwards. And it seemed as though they became an entirely different person. And the reason was that their identity was wrapped up in this position, in this title. And so when it was no longer a thing, they were directionless, so to speak. So it's the same kind of idea, just in a different scenario. And then caretakers sometimes experience this too. As I said, I have a friend whose significant other is gradually losing physical abilities because of an injury years ago. And that they experience a loss of feelings of freedom because they're constantly having to change their routine or create new routines in order to care for this other individual. And the same kind of thing might happen with empty nesters. When our children are grown and they leave home, we kind of are lost and listless or restless for a while, because even though we may be happy for them and maybe this is what we work towards, was to successfully launch them into their own productive adulthood, it's still painful because it has now changed our routine. It's a loss, essentially. And this hits hard because we attach our identity to these things, to what we physically or mentally do all of the time, so that when that gets derailed, even temporarily, we don't ask, what can I do? We tend to ask, okay, well, who am I now? Because it feels like it's changed our whole identity. And I know I went through that when my daughter moved out. Again, when I was injured, when I intentionally left my job to pursue something else, I still felt kind of I was off routine wise for about a year, which is why it took me so long to get started on grad school, was because I was just kind of rattling around trying to find myself and what my identity was now. So we tend to ask, who am I now? And we often have a grief experience along with it, whether it's a short-term thing, like a temporary injury, like the stress fracture, or a longer-term thing, like caring for someone else or losing someone that we've been caring for so long that caring for them became ingrained, or children growing up and moving out. Whatever the situation is, the details that I used in these examples are different, but the grief is often similar. We miss and grieve our strength, our independence, our routine, our role, our plans, whatever those look like. And it doesn't mean that we're weak. It means it mattered. And grieving that loss is okay. And that's kind of where the mental health side comes in, because we're struggling with frustration. We're struggling with anxiety, depression, especially if physical things were helping to alleviate some of that. We may be struggling with comparison to other people that are farther along than we thought than we are, or are where we thought we would be because of whatever. Loneliness, loss of confidence, loss of identity. And these feelings are real. Another great example is a client, a client profile that I had in my last school term, that at the age of 18 got into an accident around graduation, and that threw them into, and again, this is a fake client profile, just to be clear, but I'm sure this has happened to someone. They got in an accident that took the life of a friend, and resulted in numerous surgeries and long periods of recovery after the fact. And one of the things that I picked up on in this case is that this person was probably grieving. They weren't just grieving the loss of their friend. They were probably grieving the loss of what that next year or so after graduation was supposed to look like, because it suddenly changed for them, and suddenly they can't or they couldn't. So From the mental health side, when we're struggling with this frustration and anxiety and depression, comparison, loneliness, loss of confidence, loss of identity, those feelings are real. They are real, and they can sometimes blindside us and make whatever's happening look and feel a lot worse than it might be. And sometimes it just is worse. But what if the path isn't gone? What if the path isn't gone? What if it's temporarily blocked? Or what if it's blocked because we need to find another way around the tree? So when a tree falls across a path or a road or whatever, and this is proverbially speaking, of course, maybe not as much literal, but sometimes literal, right? It doesn't destroy everything. It just blocks one route most of the time. Not the whole journey. And sometimes we spend so much time staring at the giant tree, which is the stress fracture or the job change or the children moving out or the road to recovery after a major surgery. Sometimes we spend so much time staring at that giant tree that we forget to take in everything around it that might work in our favor. Now, I call this wallowing. And I am really good at it. I am better about not slipping into the wallow, but I can be the master of sitting around feeling sorry for myself because I can't physically do if I've injured myself, or because something has prevented me from moving forward on the path that I thought was going to work out. Or like when I left my job of many, many years. Before that, there was the construction downturn. I worked in the construction industry. Good morning, Miss Heather. I worked in the construction industry, and when we had the housing crash, because I was more on the administrative side of things in a not-for-profit, it took a long time for the repercussions to come back around to me. But when it did, it was a huge plot twist. It changed everything. I had to be cut to part-time. I had to figure out something else to do. And that's when I entered school. And what happened there was upon entering school, a different journey began that has resulted in where I am now that I never really saw what it was going to become at the time. So again, I'm super familiar with wallowing. I basically whined and complained for the first 3 weeks of my stress fracture. When I saw what was coming with the housing crash, I was kind of in a tailspin because those kind of plot twists, those kind of trees in the path, like I said, we tend to get super focused on the thing, and it takes us a while to get to where we can start looking for alternatives. When I started looking for alternatives during my stress fracture, my orthopedic and I argued a lot because I would consistently ask with every visit, what can I do? Because that's when my thinking changed and I became less focused on what I can't do, more focused on what I could do. And because he knew me and he knew that I was not very good at sitting. In fact, I was at work and I was supposed to be off my foot, but in the boot, I was still doing a lot of things at the office that I wasn't supposed to be doing. And I was like, what can I do for exercise? Because I was stressed out and I was trying to figure out how to alleviate the stress. And he would tell me, you can sit on the couch and you can do leg raises, from your knee to your foot. That is it. You can't do anything else. That is all you can do. And I was just so angry at him all the stinking time. And I listened because I didn't want to further hurt myself. But I also did a lot of research in that time. Anyway, that could be a rabbit trail. But the point is again, when we sit and we get focused on this gigantic tree and we tend to wallow, and in most cases, it doesn't mean that it's over. It doesn't mean that the tree is there permanently, that the path is blocked permanently. It means we have to wait for a while, or things might look a little different than what we originally planned. Not that it's over. So sometimes we have to wait and heal. Sometimes we have to clear some things out of the way so that we can go ahead and get through. Sometimes we have to find another way around, or sometimes we discover a different, more meaningful path, which is what happened for me, going to college in the downturn, starting to study for my Bachelor of Psychology. When I did go back to work full time and took a break from college, I constantly felt this pull to go back to grad school and finish the job that eventually led to me leaving the job and retiring so that I could pursue those things. And even with that choice, I was still rattling around for a year trying to kind of find myself because I felt a loss of identity when I left that job. So how can we do this? How can we clear the path? How can we find a new way around it, or even see the possibility of a new way around it? Well, like I said, sometimes we got to wait and heal. That's just it. Sometimes the path we end up on, and this has been the case for me, and I've touched on this a little bit the last few weeks, sometimes the path we end up in is the healing path that leads us to something different. And I have come to realize that my journey through grad school has been as much, if not more, about healing some more parts of me and drawing closer to my higher power, as it has been about learning and achieving that degree. There's been huge, huge transformations for me in the past couple of years while in this program. So even though the tree that blocked my path moved, I had already forged a new way around it. I had already forged a new path, and that's the one I'm on right now. Just like with my stress fracture, that was a temporary tree. I found other things to do during that time. I started meditating. I started journaling. I did upper body things as I could sitting down. I found different ways to get around, and eventually it healed, and I was able to slowly get back on that path that I was on. However, I did a lot of research during that time too, so that I could learn how to prevent something like that from happening again. Now, is it an ironclad guarantee? Absolutely not. But it did change my running form. It changed the type of shoes I wore, and it changed my knowledge about how to properly recover from exercise activities to make myself stronger so that something like that wouldn't happen again. Is that always a guarantee? Absolutely not. So that's how we find a new path or clear the path, is we either wait and we heal and we find other things to do to kind of release that energy, release that anxiety, release that depression, whatever, grief, whatever it is that's happening there. And then we start asking ourselves, what can I do? And we start focusing on what we can do instead of what we aren't able to do. And that's where we start to change our mindset. The other thing we might look at is what parts of us haven't changed, because if what we were doing is what our identity is wrapped up in, then we have to start identifying what parts of us are still intact that weren't wrapped up in that. Does that make sense? So we ask what we can do. We ask what parts of us haven't changed, that haven't been affected by this, and how we can kind of plow forward with a focus on those instead of the things that we can't do. We can ask, how do I care for myself in this season or in this situation, instead of fighting it, or instead of wallowing. Just wallowing is such an old term anymore. You hardly hear anybody say it, but I love it because it makes me think of a pig rolling around in the mud, and they're probably enjoying it, but usually when we're wallowing, we're not, right? So another big one there, and I've talked about this recently too, is where can I accept help, which can sometimes be very difficult for us, especially if we're independent, if we're prideful, and we might ask the question, where can I accept help, so that I can move forward a little bit and not be stuck here while I'm waiting for the tree to clear, or to see the path around it, or whatever the case may be, or to heal, just waiting to heal. For those of us, and the final question we can ask ourselves is, what can I learn from this that I wouldn't have learned otherwise? Again, back to my stress fracture example, what I learned was all the things that might keep me from injuring myself in the future in that way. Can we prevent ourselves from being injured? No. And also, you know, I had a significant other years ago, a previous significant other who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes quite unexpectedly. And they had that wallowing time where they just didn't want to deal with it. They made statements like, I'm just going to eat chicken and broccoli for the rest of my life, and not have any fun anymore. And while they did that, I dug into the research and learned things about it so that I could show them that they could continue to eat a lot of the things that they loved, just in smaller portions. So that's what I mean when I say, what can I learn from this that I wouldn't have otherwise? They eventually learned how to modify those things so that it wasn't as big of an issue. And they were able to get off of their medication because of that. So there's a lot of things that we can learn when there are plot twists in our life. They're usually there to teach us something. Or they, again, lead us down a path where we are intended to learn something, or something that we need to learn. Pretty much, I just said the same thing 2 different ways. So that we can heal, so that we can become better, and we can become better at seeing more of those paths, more of those ways around those obstacles. So for those of us that believe in a higher power, sometimes we learn about ourselves from these obstacles, which I just kind of touched on. Because I know personally, again, I believe in God, whatever your lane is, whatever your higher power is, whatever works for you, you can kind of take this and apply it that way. But I personally know that God doesn't always remove the obstacle right away. And it's because he is teaching me something. And it's also because my identity was never supposed to be wrapped up in one ability or one role that I play or one season that I'm in. That's just really important to me. And I think regardless of your beliefs, that can apply to you. So now when I'm injured, and I've injured my lower back a couple of times. These are the things that happen as you start climbing up there in age. I don't wallow as much. I can get a little frustrated and I can get pretty grumpy when things aren't working the way I think they should be. But I don't wallow as much anymore. I take steps to improve them. Even my boyfriend mentioned recently I had something going on with my shoulder. It was just a weird thing that happened. But it was preventing me from doing certain things for a few days, and it was quite painful. But even he commented that instead of complaining about it for a couple of days, I went right into the things that I knew might help it, specific stretches, a muscle rub that I have from my boutique, things like that. A lot of times I would not look at those things until 3 or 4 days in. I was right on it. I was like, okay, well, this isn't acceptable. So let's work on this and let's work on that. And, looked at my trigger point therapy workbook, things that I often put off until I've been dealing with it for way too long when I could have possibly helped it much farther ahead. So now when I'm injured, I find things that I can do to make me feel better. I might do yoga stretches if I can't get out there and run. I might do a lot more walking or running if I can't do upper body works, things like that. And without fail, just getting that blood moving through my body can sometimes make the problem feel a lot better too. So again, I focus on things I can do that make me feel better. Different types of workouts, meditation, journaling, whatever fits, craft, trying something, some new hobby or craft that you've been wanting to do, but you don't stop long enough to do so. Sometimes we're forced to stop and kind of look at things differently and try different things to focus our attention. But whatever fits, I focus on what I can do until I can do more. And this is something they talk about, even with senior citizens in exercise. And I've touched on this before too. As their abilities reduce, which is common with age, personal trainers, tend to try to get seniors to focus on what they can do versus what they used to be able to do. Instead of ruminating about what they could do, to continue trying to focus on what they can do at their level, whatever that is now. And the same applies to heart patients, as they're rehabilitating, the focus is on what they can do now, not what they used to be able to do. So again, sometimes the tree in the path, it takes up all of our focus, and it makes it really, really easy to sit around and feel sorry for ourselves. But whether that tree is permanent or whether it's temporary, there are other paths. There are other ways to get around it, over it, under it, through it, whatever the case may be. If we can take our focus off the tree for just a minute and look around at what's surrounding it. Because until we can do that, until we can take the focus off of what we can't do, we are not able to focus on what we can do, or any of those alternatives. So I hope that wasn't too circular for you today. And I hope it made sense, and I hope you found it helpful. My challenge to you this week is, what is your I can't? Figure out what your I can't is. And again, feel free to drop it in the comments. Feel free to send me a message if you don't want to share it publicly, journal it, whatever. Is that I can't, whatever it is it temporary or is it permanent? Is it emotional or is it physical? Is it a physical issue or is it a fear? Something emotional that's preventing you from moving forward or moving around that tree or clearing it out. It's okay to ask, why can't I? But also ask, what can I do? And maybe another good question is, what is this inviting me to become? What path is this inviting me to find as an alternative? So remember, eventually everyone faces a what if I can't season in their lives. Often more than one time, right? But our value isn't determined by our productivity or what we can physically accomplish every day. And sometimes accepting I can't isn't giving up. It's the first step toward figuring out what comes next. So if you found this helpful, please share. I hope you did. Again, drop it in the comments if you're comfortable. If not, send me a message. Let me know how you do on the challenge. Let me know how you did on last week's challenge. And until next week, I hope you'll focus on what you can do, and you'll be well.